Please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation and send any messages through to our chat. We'll be able to sort of run through those if you have questions during the talk. If you have any of those, we will sort of curate them, and then at the end of the session, we'll hand them over to Socotra. The rule of 2 feet applies here. So if you need to head off for any particular reason, please feel free to do that. We'd love to see you sort of stay the whole time, but if you do need to dash off for something, we understand. And then lastly, if you have any sort of feedback from the session, you're free to either shoot that through in the chat, or you can send it through to us at the Tech Leadership Group. Great. I'm going to share my screen quick, just run through some stuff. All right, we want to thank our very gracious sponsors for the meetup. We have 2 sponsors now. So we have Peach Payments, who I currently work for, but we do a lot of stuff around payments in South Africa and in Kenya and in Mauritius. If you want to learn more about Peach, you're more than welcome to jump on our website and you can click on the Learn More. And we have a new sponsor, Mama Money, who's also joined us this session. Mama Money is doing some pretty great stuff in the fintech space here in South Africa, and so we're very excited to have Socotra, who's also from Mama Money, joining us today to give us our talk. We also have a Tech Leadership Twitter channel. It is very active. We try to send out messages, every day with useful articles that we curate during the week. This takes a lot of effort to go through and manage. So I'd really appreciate you jumping in here and following us on Tech Leadership. And then, if there's any interesting things on here, share them out. Give us some feedback around the articles. We like having those sort of conversations. It's a great place to sort of interact. What we also do is have a newsletter. So if you aren't a member of our newsletter, this is a great place to sort of come in and get a monthly letter of some of the better articles that we've seen have some really good traction. And what that sort of looks like, you can see, we'll go through them and talk a little bit about the ones that we feel would have a really good impact within the tech leadership space. We also have a very interesting competition today. So Mama Money is sponsoring us a bit of a swag bag for the coolest tweet. So if you head over to Twitter and at Tech Leadership X and use the hashtag Tech Leadership CPT, anything that inspires you during the talk, or something that you have a thought while we're going through the talk from Socotra, send that through to Twitter. We'll be selecting somebody, and you may stand a chance of winning that swag bag. So that's very cool. I would also like to introduce you to our speaker. So Socotra, I've done a lot of talking. I want to hand that off to you now. But Socotra is currently an Agile coach at Mama Money. I've worked with her before. She's a very cool human being. She's a very active member of the Agile community. She's been helping that community for the last 3 years. She's also served on the Scrum user group over the last 2 years. She's very passionate about helping teams uncover better ways of working remotely and having fun while doing so. And today's talk from her is about leading in remote spaces. So I'm very excited. I want to hand off to Socotra, and thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the great intro. Hi, everybody. I'm going to just quickly share my screen quickly. You'll have to give me 2 seconds to do that. And maybe just a little bit of a heads up. We'll be saving a little bit of time at the end for questions. I won't be taking questions in the middle of the talk, but we'll definitely save some time at the end there. Cool. So you've joined tonight because you might be curious about leadership and what that looks like in remote spaces. It's also something that I'm quite curious about, and I definitely have a couple of thoughts that I'd like to share. Rob did a really great job of introducing me already, but a couple of things I'll just maybe reiterate. I'm the Agile coach at Mama Money. And I'm also a member of the Remote Coaches Consultancy, and that's where a lot of this content comes from. You might have seen some of that content in the Agile space specifically. There's a lot of great work that's being done, and I think it's worthwhile sharing. So if you would like to chat to me further after this session, feel free to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn. The Remote Coaches, we also have platforms or spaces on those platforms as well. Okay, so I'm going to throw some stats at you, a couple of numbers, because why not? Before COVID, about 10 to 15% of employees worked remotely. And what's quite interesting to add to that is at this current point in time, about 98% of employees would like to work remotely at least some of the time. And that comes from the Buffer report from last year in 2020. And it's predicted that post-COVID, about 40 to 50% of people will be working remotely in some shape or form. And what I get from all of these numbers is that remote working is here to stay. It's going to be part of how we work collectively together going forward. And as leaders, I think it's a big question about what's next and what are the challenges that we're facing in remote work or leading in a remote space, and what are some maybe upcoming challenges. But I'd like to get us into a little bit of a story, and hopefully this is a very relatable story. This is a story about a CEO that was faced with the same dilemma that we all had last year of, okay, everyone in the workforce is going to be joining remotely. We're in the middle of a pandemic. What does that mean for us? And maybe you remember this incredibly funny meme, but to share video or not to share video, that is the question. And this CEO, obviously coming from a typical in-office workspace and being very easily able to see who's engaged, who's not engaged, how could they read people's situations and help and kind of support where needed, to not seeing anybody and maybe just seeing a couple of initials on the screen. This particular CEO, the initial gut response was, okay, I can't see people engaging. I don't know what's happening for people. Maybe we should make a blanket rule to say everybody should share their video, because that's one way that we could see. Obviously, I think we're a bit older and wiser at this stage, but that was a very pertinent question at that time. And what I want to share with all of you is sort of a different approach and unpack that story with this approach. So what I'm sharing with you is something called the spine model. Essentially, the triangle that we're seeing is, what is most important is at the top, and then you follow down that triangle to the very bottom. And in this particular instance, this CEO wanted to see people's faces because he wanted to find out what the level of engagement was. And that meant that the practice that he wanted to have in his business was, okay, the rule of meetings always having people's videos on. But when we start kind of at the bottom of that triangle, what we might be missing is that bigger perspective of, what's happening in the system, and how has that changed, especially in a remote space. We went from maybe offices going into working remotely. How are those needs sort of changed in that space? Because they do, and they are. And then looking at those needs, what are sort of the values? What are the things that we're optimizing in the system? So if we had to try this story again in a different way, using this different approach, the triangle might look like this. okay, the need here is actually the leader wants to see a level of engagement. It's very hard to talk to people with just a little, initials and know if you're getting any feedback or engagement, or that people are, focused on what's actually being shared, or what's actually happening. And maybe it gets underpinned by that value of, great, we want to make sure that actually everyone is being heard, everyone is included, everyone's involved, everybody has the feeling that they have the space to contribute and to raise their thoughts and opinions or concerns. And if we started there, potentially, we wouldn't get to that practice of everybody's video needs to be on. Maybe we'd lean a little bit into some remote collaboration principles, and maybe a practice could be, let's co-create some visual documentation together. So starting with the need and looking at what we really value, what then is that practice or outcome? I think a big challenge for leaders in the remote space is that we often get excited by best practices, and we get excited about tools, and we get excited about all of these things. Underpinned by this need to help and to create the right space for people so that we can work well together. But sometimes that intention gets misplaced, where we should be taking a step back and seeing this as an opportunity to relook at what are our actual needs and how are they sort of aligned with our particular set of values. And then if we looked at the practice, what are alternative ways to communicate? What would that look like? And so instead of forcing everybody to have their cameras on because we want engagement, okay, well, great, engagement, there are other ways to get there, other more inclusive, safer ways to get there. And that's going to look very different depending on your company. It might be dependent on a specific team. There are a lot of different things that could impact your thought process. And I think what's interesting to think about here is that every organization is going to be different. Every organization is going to have its own context. And I think it gets dangerous when we create these blanketed rules about best practices and the best tools to use. A lot of things that I've been seeing or hearing from leaders is that, in the remote space, it's tough to get engagement. We need videos. We need to get people to go to online team builds, because that's the way we're going to build connection. So a lot of sort of mandated things, but not a lot of the thinking behind that, where I think remote work is an opportunity for us to get back in touch with those underlying needs and values. So remote challenges. Remote is hard. I think we need to admit that up front. And leading in a remote space can feel even more challenging because there's a lot of things going on, and some challenges that you might have faced when you were in person just sort of gets amplified because we're working remotely. Well, one of the first things that I want to highlight, and it might be seen pretty obvious, is that remote spaces can often feel very unequal. So we just need to acknowledge that people are having vastly different experiences when they come to work online. You have some people who are extroverts, some are introverts. Some of the extroverts might be hating this, and some introverts might be loving this, and they are thriving. You might have some people who have 3-4 screens, and they have an incredible work from home setup. And then you have another person who's in one of their kids' bedrooms and is on a little laptop, and kids are running around outside causing havoc. So it's really important as a leader to really reflect and understand that people are having very, very different experiences. Another thing to highlight is that in a remote space, there's a lot more vulnerability. You can feel a lot more vulnerable. If you get on a call with somebody, there's that awkwardness, and sometimes you don't have as many opportunities to feel like you might know somebody as well. There might be not as many opportunities to build trust or create connection, or even just creating shared narratives around the work that you're doing, or maybe it's in teams. Does that team have a shared narrative? And how that narrative or that story helps sort of build empathy. If we think about just people joining from all over the world, they have different contexts as well. And maybe they're feeling vulnerable. Maybe English isn't their first language. Maybe we have, cultural differences, and they're eating lunch at a different time. And there's a lot going on, and it feels like a much more vulnerable space. And then there are the interruptions, the unforeseen things that happen. Maybe it's a lag in your internet, or we're having load shedding, or there's a school run. There's all sorts of potential interruptions that might not have been there when we were all in person. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, and also to realize why leading in a remote space can often feel more challenging or more difficult. So I guess the question is, but how do we help as leaders? And I'm going to be sharing 2 principles with you this evening. We looked at the spine model and what would be a different approach in terms of our thinking, starting with needs and values. And then if we go further down the line of that triangle, what are some principles that could help us? And to help with the challenges that I mentioned, the first one would be around creating equal opportunity. So this is a fairly common or understandable picture for most South Africans. Hopefully some of us have had the opportunity going on a safari, and you're in the safari vehicle and it's high up, and you've got a ranger, and you are primed and ready to have the best safari experience of your life. Now imagine you're in this safari vehicle and you are ready to go and see all the animals that you can. But somebody else is on a rickety bicycle on the same road. They're on a bicycle, they're exposed, they're trying to keep up, they're not elevated, they don't have the same, they're definitely not having the same experience as the people or the person that's in the safari vehicle. And when we think about opportunity in the remote space, this is the kind of metaphor that I want us to hold on to. And when we think about that person with the 4 screens that has the incredible setup versus the person who's on the little laptop in their kid's bedroom, those are the kinds of contexts that we want to try and sort of draw attention to. What often happens, and I think this in particular is really interesting, as we might be thinking about what remote work will look like in future for those of us who might still have a little bit of an office culture, and now we've gotten this remote culture. How do we blend the two? Does a hybrid approach work? What would that look like? But again, as leaders, thinking about how can we help a person, every person have this as close to the same experience as possible. And an example I'm going to give here is, I'm sure most of us have come across this situation. Everybody's in a room at the office, maybe in a meeting room, and we have a shared screen, one screen, and 1 or 2, or maybe a couple other people are dialing in. They are going to have an extremely different experience to the people who are in person in one room sharing one screen. And it's not just that as an example. maybe think about any circumstances in your space that is unequal. And ask ourselves, what are ways that we can help create some equal opportunity? Because I think being remote, it actually amplifies that unevenness or that inequality. So I'm not just going to drop the questions on you to think about it. I will give you a couple of like practical ways that we could actually look at this. There's a couple other examples maybe before I jump into the practical tips, but something that somebody might be thinking when they're on a remote call is, if they're all in a room together thinking, well, I'm alone and they're all together, I'm immediately excluded and feel left out. Another thought might be, everyone's on a call and a couple of people are talking and I don't want to interrupt. Maybe I don't want the meeting to go on longer. I don't want to feel like I don't know what everybody is talking about. Things are going really, really fast, and I don't have the time to actually absorb what's being said. Maybe some of these are ringing true for some people. Okay, so getting into some practical ways, how we can, as leaders, or just anybody at all, create equal opportunity in the remote space. So one very simple, easy thing to do is just having a mechanism for virtual writing. The default that we tend to have when we work remotely is to speak, because that's what we did when we were in person. But that definitely creates some imbalance. Why not all be writing together at the same time, instead of hearing one person at a time? Saves a lot of time. It creates opportunity for everybody to feel engaged, and it actually makes things a lot faster. Again, this concept of going fully remote, some of us might have the luxury of having an office space, and realizing that people are different, right? Some people will thrive working fully remote. Some people might need to go into the office and want that sort of flexibility. And some of us might already be fully remote. But the concept of going fully remote is, if one person is not there in person, that we all default to remote, meaning everybody logging in on their own separate machine so that everybody can have the same experience and that there's fairness and equality. This one I've learned just within this year is super valuable. Just giving ourselves time to think and read. When we are working or collaborating remotely, it almost feels counterproductive to give time to reflect or to read, but we actually take in information a lot quicker if we read, and time to reflect can be almost invaluable. But a lot of the times when we jump together and we want to collaborate and meet remotely, it's just talk, and go, because that feels productive and that feels like we are doing work. When we give pause or time to pause and time to think and read and reflect, it almost feels like a waste. But I like to challenge it and sort of encourage people to take that time. Maybe people have been going to back-to-back meetings and they haven't had time to fully get to grips with the context. Maybe giving a little bit of time at the beginning of a session will help get everybody on the same page. Or maybe a time to reflect helps that innovative thinking and the next best idea to come to fruition in somebody's mind. Another way to create equal opportunity and almost to set the table when we're collaborating remotely is to kind of pre-populate names, bring people into the space. And I'm going to be showing examples of all of these in a second. And the last one, lightweight ways to show opinion. There are times when decision making is needed in a remote space, especially for leaders, and you want to get a quick gauge of what's going on for people. There are simple, lightweight ways to do this, and I think it really bolsters engagement and helps create that sense that everybody's input is valued. Sometimes people will be invited to a remote session and not speak at all, or not be asked their opinion at all, and they feel a little bit less perhaps valued. I can tell you one thing, that they will definitely feel a lot less engaged, and you might not get the best outcomes from that session. I'm going to flick through a couple of examples. I'm going to go out of presentation mode for this, just so that you can see. So we've got one over here, just a lightweight way to get people's opinions. And we'll be able to drag this, see if we've got high confidence or low confidence. Goodness, how many times have we come into this? When we're looking at options, which one feels like the right decision? I've already got some people's names here that are on the call. Yeah, but really bringing everybody into the space, and a lightweight way to say, okay, cool, this is maybe something that we would like to do. Getting everyone's input, sticky notes, super, super valuable. This is an example of creating time to think and read. Maybe it's co-creating what we need to talk about. Things that might be important for people automatically makes everybody feel that much more engaged. Just getting a feel, temperature of how people are feeling on a particular thing. Just pre-populating people's names sort of make them feel a lot more part of everything. Okay. The next principle that I'm going to share is around connection. So we spoke about creating equal opportunity, because there's a lot of unequalness in the remote space. And the other one is that we said that the remote space can feel quite vulnerable and sometimes very awkward. So we're starting with a picture of a typical office space, and maybe this is what some of your experiences were when, well, pre-COVID. But we've got a couple of dots on this picture, and they're sort of just trying to highlight what were some potential points for connection before. The lady's walking down those stairs at the back there. Maybe she's just come from a particular meeting where she's had a chance to connect with people. Maybe she got there before the meeting and she had a few moments to chit chat. There's a dot at the coffee mug. Maybe a couple of people went to grab, they're coffee connoisseurs. They love making coffee. They are very passionate about it. And because of this narrative, there's rapport there. Maybe the other lady sitting next to the gentleman, they've got the same color shirt or style shirts. That's like a quick serendipitous moment for connection and for them to create a little bit more empathy and a little bit more space for drawing attention to differing contexts. And that's what we're really trying to get to with building connection. So This is a big topic, I think, for leaders. We all want to make sure that people feel engaged and connected, because being remote can feel sometimes a bit isolating, and we don't have those moments of serendipitous connection as much. So we have to be that much more intentional about it. And there are a couple of things that we could look at that could be helpful. If you're an organization that has meetings, there's sort of certain meeting practices that you could use to help bolster that connection. It might be, instead of having the awkward chit chat at the beginning of the meeting, maybe it's like a quick check-in for everybody. It could be fun, it could be serious, it could be focused on the work at hand or the topic at hand. But there are definitely some small things that we can do to bring in that feeling of connection in that space. Team building. I've seen a lot of very interesting team buildings. It's something that we like to do at Mama Money and have been experimenting quite a bit in terms of what does good team building look like in a remote space. For us, it's been what is free, low barrier to entry, isn't too intimidating that people would want to actually jump on and participate in, something that allows for a fair number of people to be involved, and ultimately is quite fun. Another place that we can nurture connection is just in casual connections. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of what they could look like. But so many people and leaders that I've spoken to and met with keep saying, I really miss the water cooler conversations. And I guess my initial thought with that is, sometimes we misconstrue the water cooler conversation for culture. And for what it really is, just those serendipitous moments that aren't going to build out your entire organization culture, but they are like small little moments of connection that can be useful in building empathy. Okay, I'm going to share a couple of examples, some visual examples of meeting practices that you could definitely use in your space. And I'm going to do it again by minimizing myself, but this is an example of a very, very quick check-in, just asking people a particular or pertinent question. This could also change to be something, project related, if you wanted it to be a little bit less casual. Here's another one. It's called Constellations. You would get everybody to have an avatar, and then you would move or ask a question, who likes ice cream? Everyone would then, if you agree, you'd move into the middle of the circle. This is a great one, especially when maybe tensions are a little bit high or things have been a bit intense. Do a round of appreciation. This one I love because it definitely helps, especially when there are people in very different situations or cultures, or even sort of the organization is very distributed. And maybe you want to highlight the fact that some people don't have English as their first language, and that there's a differing context there. Another way to kind of increase connection is to actually break out into smaller groups. It's a lot more intimate. Each person gets a lot more time to speak and to share. So where there are opportunities to have smaller discussions in smaller sort of murmur groups, that will help people feel a little bit more heard, engaged, and connected. And then I know, Rob, you're talking about getting more and more distributed, and one of the benefits of being remote is that you have a bigger pool of talent, and that can mean looking at people, talent from different countries, different time zones, and just again drawing, creating more focus on the different contexts can really help build that empathy. So where are people calling in from? Are they missing their lunch for this? Are they missing their dinner for this? Really sort of helps create that empathy. Cool. And then in terms of team building, just a couple of examples, some lightweight things that you could try. This also sort of covers the water cooler a little bit. What are some newsworthy things that somebody would like to share very quickly, maybe even at the start of the meeting? When we collaborate together remotely, we sometimes feel that, well, maybe not feel, but sometimes it tends to go on quite long, and people actually need more rest. So what is a lightweight way for us to know when people need to take a break? Hopefully we're being kind to our humans and it's not going on for too long, or not much longer than 45 minutes or an hour at a time without actually taking a break. It's a cool little guessing game just to create a little bit of connection. I've got one around sharing everybody's favorite song. People can share links, get a little bit of banter going. Maybe it's just before a meeting starts, people are coming together and playing tic-tac-toe. This one is great, especially for distributed teams. What's the weather like? What's going on? People love to talk about the weather. Okay. And then there's casual conversations or connections. Like, how do you replace the ping pong table? That is one of the big questions. What I found to work quite nicely is just create lightweight opportunities for people to have fun. And I think inviting people instead of enforcing fun activities in a remote space often goes down a lot better. Allowing people to just observe also helps. Then they can still be part of the fun, but they don't have to be forced into any fun team builds or online games. Casual interactions by design, maybe it's just setting up coffee check-ins, or I know there are sort of integrations where you can do like a coffee and a donut chat with somebody else in the organization, but those casual connections don't just happen serendipitously anymore. You actually have to be intentional and think about what that could look like for your particular organization and your particular context. And then another awesome way to create casual connections is in or through communities of practice. Usually it's sort of very self-led within the organization. Maybe people are really passionate about quality. Maybe people are really passionate about technical debt. And maybe there's an opportunity to get people self-organize and come together to do something about it and align on sort of like common passions and projects. So there was a lot of information, and I'd like just to give us a couple of minutes just to think about like what is coming up for you right now after everything I shared. I'd like to encourage you, if you have a piece of paper or a pen, just to jot something down. If you want to open up something to type in on your computer, just going to ask you to take just a couple of minutes just to reflect what's coming up for you right now. 1 more minute left. Okay. Thank you for taking the time to reflect a little bit and hopefully some interesting questions for yourself. I'm going to just sort of be wrapping up with a quick summary. First off, remote working is here to stay. As leaders, what does that mean for us? I think if you're not thinking about remote work as a leader right now, you should be. There are a lot of important questions to be asking ourselves and lots of opportunity for us to learn. When we looked at the spine model, I think just being reminded to start with needs before jumping to solutions, before jumping to best practices, before jumping to tools. I think this is an opportunity for us to reconnect with our core values, what was working for us when we were in person, and really creating this space to actually ask people in organizations, what do they need, and how can we better support them? And it really helps to have that principle-based approach. So again, before jumping to the solutions, what are some lenses that we can look through to help us determine what those needs are? You know, two of the principles that we shared, or that I shared with you tonight, the one being creating equal opportunity. How equal are our remote spaces in our current organizations? What are the needs that just come from that? It's a really great question to ask. And then another principle, you know, how connected are people feeling? How do we nurture that in the remote space? How can we help create the best environment for people within our organization as leaders? And that is that. I'd like to say thank you. And a lot of the content, again, it comes from the remote coaches. There is an awesome, quite in-depth course around remote facilitation if anybody is interested, and an upcoming conference, which is going to be pretty amazing. And I'm going to hand it over for any questions, which I'll stop sharing for so I can see everybody. And I think, yeah, we've got a couple of, I'm guessing there might be a couple of questions.
Yes, sorry. So maybe let me jump through some of them. I'm going to try go through first the questions that aren't asked by us as the organizers, sure. And then we'll go to some of our questions. So Mitch says, really enjoying this topic. Do you feel that we do more or less meetings in the remote environment?
The overwhelming answer for me, it feels like we do more, and that's just as a default. I think essentially when we were faced with the pandemic, we replaced a lot of our normal meetings, and then there was a layer above that, right? Is everybody okay? How do we know that? How do we know how everything is going? And I definitely saw an increase in meetings. And the horrible fallout of that was a day full of meetings, and then longer hours, because everybody has had no time to actually do the work. So I think the sentiment there is, don't make more meetings, make meetings more meaningful, is the sentiment that we should all hold to. And unfortunately, I think depending on your organization, the default could have been more meetings, which would be unfortunate. But again, how can we see what our needs are and then tailor that so that we are creating less waste in the system and having more meaningful conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Socotra. The next question comes a little further down. There are some shout outs, people saying like, thanks for the spine model tool that they'd forgotten about it. So that was from Karen. We have Zakaria, who has said, when I was a junior, I learned a lot through incidental learning, picking up on tidbits when others around me were engaging in conversation. With remote, these conversations happen in private. How can leadership drive the same incidental learning in remote spaces?
That's a great question. And I think the sentiment here is there's a lot that's unseen in the remote space. So sometimes we jump, what's important to think about here is like sometimes we jump to assumptions. Oh, there's no learning happening. There's no collaboration happening. And I think especially as leaders, we feel we get quite caught up in that feeling of things are not happening because they can't be seen. And I think it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation like, how is your need to learn being met? Being very intentional about that, asking that question and having that conversation. And then it might be the case that that learning need is being met, it just can't be seen. And if it's not being met, then what is an intentional way or more of an explicit way that we can bring that into what's happening in the space? Maybe it looks like, okay, great, we'll do, depending maybe on a team, we'll do pairing on certain stories. We'll have a technical session where we just kind of share our learnings together. Maybe there's an opportunity for mentoring within this space, and what does that look like remote? Do we, maybe it's a question around tooling, like how do we pair together well while we're in using two separate screens. So I think it's all around raising the question, and then knowing that in the remote space you might have to be a little bit more intentional about it, because as you said, it's not incidental. So how can we be more explicit?
Sorry if I butcher people's names while calling out these questions. I think it's Levi or Levi has asked, can you sort of suggest some good collaboration tools that they can try?
So I guess the sentiment with the spine model is, we want to jump on like really cool tools. And I think in sharing some of those practical examples, it was just on a Google slide. It's not a fancy tool like a Miro or a Mural. Those are really sort of high shelf, top level collaboration tools. But again, it's about what do you need? Maybe you don't need those fancy tools. Maybe you just need a blank whiteboard style sort of space, like a Google slide, or even a PowerPoint presentation for people just to add things on. Some of those examples, they're just little shapes. Those are just little sticky notes that people can pick up and use. And I think having visuals really helps. So those are maybe not so much the tools, but the kind of thinking that you want to have. What is low barrier to entry? Most people know how to collaborate together on a Google slide or a PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't need that. It doesn't need that much preparation or experience. Whereas if somebody jumps into a big collaboration tool like a Miro or Mural, can feel a little bit intimidating, and you might have to spend extra time just getting used to a tool when the base need is that we can all understand something together very quickly. That's all we need. That's what we're trying to solve for.
Yeah. Roberto, sorry about that. It's Levi.
Yeah, great.
I just wanted to clarify. So it's actually my first week as a manager, as a leader in a new job, and fully remote also. Team is in Cape Town, I'm in Joburg. So what you have presented about is what I've actually been exposed to all the techniques, everything that we have actually been speaking about. So in terms of tools that I'm talking about, it's because the company doesn't use Google or doesn't subscribe to Google stuff or so. So I sort of was asking for anyone in the team in here on the group on this call, any other similar to what you've been using, or similar to what I've been using, which is what we've been using now, that can actually get the guys to be interactive, to be able to move shapes, even if it's just, dummy shapes and all those things. Yeah, but anyways, yeah. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Levi. That was a good question. And welcome, and congratulations on the new role. It's going to be quite a fun one, I think.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I think there's one more question that I'm biased towards because I really want to know the answer to. And it was from Benny. And he said, in your opinion, does the Agile value individuals and interactions over processes and tools still hold up in the new remote world that we are going into?
Yes, wholeheartedly, yes. Been reflecting a lot about this. I think as we're a little bit more distant from each other, we're seeing each other through these screens, and not in person, I think we have to hold the value of putting people first that much more so. And I think, and I hope in the pandemic, it's also highlighted a little bit more about being human and being kind. I mean, a lot of us, you're looking into each other's bedrooms and lives, and we can hear each other's kids and pets, and there's a lot going on for people, and hopefully that, we can see each other as a bit more human, have a little bit more empathy. And I think the fear comes from a place of, well, how do we know what's going on if we can't be together in one place? But it still has to be about the people. It still has to be about, what is a great environment. And I think some of the challenges that we have in the remote space is around collaboration and around feeling connected with people. And it's actually around burnout, because people don't have a very clear distinction between their work and life. And those are things that we have to be extra attentive and thoughtful and caring around, because it's almost like the opposite of what people expect. Some people who maybe are a bit more anxious are thinking, well, how do we know that things are okay? How do we know that people are okay? Because maybe we can't see them, we're not connecting with them, we're not bumping into them casually in the canteen or whatever the case may be. So there's should be, I think, a re-emphasis on taking care of people, making sure that people have what they need from a remote perspective, that they feel like they can contribute in a meaningful way, that they feel connected with the organization, that they feel connected with the people that they're working with, that they have empathy, that they have a narrative, that they feel that they have the freedom or responsibility to manage themselves and to do the best work that they can, and enjoy it. I really think that as leaders, this is a great opportunity for us to really dig deep on that very, very value, that very first value, putting people above everything else. Because I think if we get that right, then everything else will just follow.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending today. Just in closing, we want to just give a couple shout outs to our sponsors, both Peach Payments and Mama Money. You guys rock. You're helping us build this community. We want to say thank you to everybody that's attended with us today. Without you guys, this event wouldn't happen. And so we want to make sure that we are delivering stuff that's important to you. If you have any suggestions on topics that you'd like to hear, reach out to us on our socials. So we're on Twitter, as you've seen. You can also hit us up at info@techleadership.co.za. with any suggestions or ideas. If you would like to give a talk in the near future on a topic that you feel would benefit the community, please do that too. We have a very tasty newsletter. It's got lots of good brain food for the month. It will take you like a long time to consume it. We really do curate really good articles that we believe would help the community. So jump on that. We'll send out links to those things once again. And then lastly, don't forget, we have a Twitter competition. So if anything from this evening sort of stood out, please hit us up on Twitter with that hashtag TechLeadershipCPT, and then we'll be selecting a winner tomorrow, and they will be winning an awesome swag bag full of cool stuff from Mama Monday. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We know that it was, cutting into your day. We want to make sure that this was a good session for you guys too. So thank you.